Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. It's a really nice chance to sit here and just kind of chat with you a little bit. It certainly helps to be the last speaker. There are some pros and cons to that, though. The con, obviously, is that the speakers before me have certainly raised the bar. And so as I listen to them, and I've heard all of them except the speaker last week, um, I know that have been treated to a wealth of knowledge and information and some really thought-provoking ideas. So that's the con because it leaves a real challenge to me. But the pro is that I'm able to connect, hopefully, with a few of their previous points and to pull them into this presentation tonight. Let me, first of all, though, before we move into the first slide, just say to you, here's my disclaimer. I am a religious educator. I am not a theologian. And obviously the speakers that preceded me are theologians. And so they gave their presentations that bent, and I don't have that gift and I don't have that education. So I will not be given that bent. But I have been a youth and young adult minister for 40 years, and I certainly have walked with our young people and talked to them about what it is to be church. And so that's the bent I'm going to come with. And so, Kevin, if you could go to the next slide. This is a quote, as you can see, from Gone In at Space, and it was this document, which is a document of Vatican II, was put out in December of 1965. Now, some of you may be sitting there and say 1965, but I just want to remind all of us that the Vatican II documents are still the governing documents of our church, very much so. And we are still living into those 60 some years later. And it's an important thing to remember that and to continue to look at that and to see what those documents and the words of those theologians and bishops and the people in that synod are still calling us to. And I particularly like this quote because it tells us, and I think it's apropos for where we are now in terms of this pandemic and where we are now in terms of all the issues that are facing our society. But those people, the people of our time who are afflicted in any way, their grief and anguish belongs to us too as followers of Christ. Whether we are directly affected or not makes no difference. They're still ours because we are part of a community. And that's an important thing to remember. The next slide, Kevin, please. This is a song by Rory Cooney, and it was very difficult to get linked to this directly, so I simply decided to use the lyrics. I want to draw your attention to the bottom lyrics. Father John O'Grady, when he talked to us 3 weeks ago, I think, he really talked about church as a place where we worship, a place where the sacraments are administered to us, a place where our faith is nurtured in community. And so looking at that place, we are to build that into a house of prayer, a house of peace, a house of care, an inn and a hospice, a fortress, a banquet hall, home for all. Our faith is nurtured in community, but that community needs to be broad and it needs to be shared. And we need to keep in mind that everyone is welcomed at the table. Our church should be a place for all. And I think also Father Jim made the point that the Catholic Church subsistent to the bigger church, we also are part of a larger community. Next slide. So my hopes in this presentation, first of all, I want to look to the model of church as the people of God. We are the people of God. And in that, Kevin, you can hit the next thing, I think. Yeah. And I'm going to do that looking at it through our baptismal call and I'm going to touch a little bit on Pope Francis's latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. But it's important to know that we as people of God are called to practice the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And we are called to live out the principles of Catholic social teaching. And we are called to do that beyond the walls of the place where we worship. Before we show the next slide, I just want to put this in context. Okay. I was on staff in a parish in St. James Parish in Casanova, and we had a very innovative and forward-thinking pastor and innovative and forward-thinking staff. And as we were reviewing those wonderful pastoral council meetings that took place every month, we said something's got to be done. We cannot continue to just do report after report after report. We've got to really look at what it means to be church in this. And so what we initiated was the question of the month. And what happened was the question was sent out with the materials for the meeting. We were asked to reflect upon the question, to pray about it, and then to come to the meeting with our response. Now, you were free to pass, but after the opening prayer, the question was read, and we just went around the table and people gave their responses. No discussion, no agreement, no disagreement. At the end of everybody's sharing, you were free to ask clarifying questions if there was something someone said that you may not have completely understood. But that was as far as it went. And then the question was tabled to be brought up the following month. And it would be brought up the following month. And at that point, we would look at what are the implications? What does this say about us as church? What are we doing well that we can improve upon? What really are we not doing that we need to start doing? And what are the implications for all of us? So now you can do the next slide. And I apologize. Oh, I did get it right. Unless you changed it. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, thank you. When I looked at my slide, I said, oh no, I typed son wrong. One of the questions we had is what would happen if St. James Casanova ceased to exist tomorrow? If it was no longer present in Casanova, what difference would that make to people in Casanova, to the community of Casanova, to the people of St. James Church? And so I'm pose that question to you. What would happen if Christ, Son of Justice, no longer existed in Troy? What would happen if that ceased to exist tomorrow? Would people notice? Obviously, people who worship there would notice, but how about the broader community? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to think about that, and then I'm going to come back to it a little bit later. We had some very interesting answers to this question when we did this with St. James. All right, Kevin, you can go. All right, Kevin, the next slide. Yes. All right. Our word mass is derived from the word missa. And when we used to dismiss the church, there are many variations on this now, but when we dismiss the assembly, the presider would dismiss the assembly with the words ita missa est, which literally meant go, she, meaning us, the church, has been sent. Now, there are variations on that now, but literally that's what it means. Go, she, the church, we have been sent. And missa comes from misso. I think there should be something up there, Kevin. Right. Which is the root of mission. And the next piece. really that says to us, the liturgy does not come to an end. Those assembled are sent forth to bring the fruits of the Eucharist to the world. We have gathered as a community. Our faith has been nurtured in this place with this community, but we are called to go forth with the fruits of the Eucharist that we have just received. We are called to be perfect as our heavenly Abba is perfect. John O'Grady made this point in his talk, and I loved what he said. He pointed out that perfection does not mean what we think it means in terms of that there can't be anything possibly wrong, but rather we are called to completion. And we are called to that completion. I think the completion we are called to is in Matthew's Gospel 25, 31 to 46, which basically are the works of mercy, the separation of the sheep and the goats. That's the completion we are called to. How do we take the fruits of the Eucharist and go out and minister to our brothers and sisters, to our neighbors? And Sisters of St. Joseph would use the term dear neighbors. And I really mulled over that whole notion of completion and how we are called to completion. And I remember not many times, but the few times where sadly we had to bury somebody young and trying to make sense of this when, people all around you are saying, so young, they wanted to be a doctor, they had to be a nurse, they wanted to do the Peace Corps. They had so many dreams, and yet here they're gone. And I remember saying to parents, obviously the work that God has had for them has been completed. Their journey is done. They are being called home. So I think that notion of completion, obviously the older we get, the more we come to completion, but I think it happens at any time. But we need to be conscious of the fact that the liturgy and the place where we are nurtured in community needs to go forth. Kevin? This also from a Vatican II document, Lumen Gentium. This is from November of 1964. All the faithful, that is, who by baptism are incorporated into Christ, are constituted the people of God, who have been made sharers in their own way in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ, and play their part in carrying out their mission for the whole Christian people in the church and in the world. And our mission is to proclaim the kingdom of God that is here and not yet. This is the concept of unity, not uniformity. Kevin, the next thing. There's the threefold office of priest, prophet, and king. Our baptismal call, this priest, prophet, and king, is the call for all of us. It is mentioned in the Vatican II documents, and it's reinforced in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. How we live out that call is through our vocation. We can live that out as lay people. We can live that out as religious who really are lay people, ordained. We live that out through the vocation of marriage, through the vocation of single life. It's lived out, and there's the unity. We all live it out. We don't live it out in a uniform way. And I remember, and I went looking for this book for this presentation. I couldn't find it, nor could I remember the author. I kind of remember that it was a series of essays that an editor put together, but it talked about the order of baptism. And it said that there is an order to baptism. There's no hierarchy there. If I am called to ordination, I'm living my baptismal call out through that vocation of ordination. If I am called to religious life, I'm doing it there. If I am called to the lay state, I'm doing it there, whether that's marriage or single. There's no hierarchy there. It's just a difference of gifts and how we live out that life. And I just wish we as church could really enforce that. I think this is an editorial comment. It might solve a lot of our issues with clericalism and hierarchical and a misunderstanding of authority and where the power is. As I said, this is named in the Vatican II documents. It's reinforced through the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We are all called to be priests. We are anointed at baptism and sealed again at confirmation. The gifts of the Spirit are given to us at baptism, and they are reaffirmed, not given anew, but reaffirmed at confirmation. Next slide. We are priests when we minister to the needs of others. And again, depending upon my state in life and depending upon how the gifts and talents I have, that ministering looks very different for all of us. But there's a unity in the ministering, not a uniformity. We are priests when we offer up the sacrifices of our daily lives, when we offer up all the joys and the sorrows that come our way. And Pope Francis actually, he doesn't use the term we are priests, but he does talk about the sacrifices of our daily lives tying into the neighbor and in solidarity with the neighbor. We are prophet when we pass on our faith and share how God has touched our lives. And again, we all do that in different ways. You know, there's a statement in the U.S. Catechism that I love, and it says that it is the responsibility and sacred duty of each succeeding generation to pass on their faith to the next generation. We certainly do that in our catechetical formation, but there are so many other ways where we can pass on that faith and share how God has touched our lives. And God touches our lives in many different ways, and how we respond to that is also very different. And some people respond in a very positive way. And unfortunately, some people, especially if in fact, grief upon grief has been handed to them, may respond in a not so positive way. But then our role then is to work with them and to help them. This is where I got a little editorial. I wanted to be true to the words of the Catechism and the document, priest, prophet, and king, but the feminist in me had a little trouble with just king, and I had to go with queen and ruler, and I didn't want to switch to the next phrase with it until I went through this. So we are king, queen, ruler when we are servant leader and rein in our self-centered tendencies. So I'm going now with priest, prophet, and servant leader. Jesus certainly showed us what it meant to be a servant leader, and it is up to us to exercise that servant leadership within our community of church at place and within our community of church and the broader world. We are all called to be priest, prophet, servant leader through our own vocation and in our own space with our own unique gifts and the gifts of the Spirit that we have been endowed with. Whenever I did a confirmation class with our young people, I would certainly concentrate on the gifts of the Spirit. And I would say to them, think about your lives and think about what gift you think that has been acting, the Spirit has been using, acting through you. And how has that been happening? And then think about the gift that you struggle most with, that you would like to have, but you struggle most with. That's the prayer when you are confirmed, whenever that confirmation comes. That's the prayer, to thank God in gratitude for the gifts you have been given, but then to ask for those gifts of the Spirit that will make you a better disciple of Christ. You know, Brother Mickey made the comment, Brother Mickey's presentation with all of his art, which is wonderful. And he had some really great comments in there that I hope people take the time to go back and really look at some of those quotes. But one of the things he said there is that the Spirit does not fly backward. I love that. The Spirit does not fly backward. So we're in the midst of this pandemic crisis. We're in the midst of this immigration border issues. We're in the midst of the whole scene in Boulder, Colorado, and you want to throw your hands up and forget it, in frustration and say, seriously, where is God in this? Where is the Spirit in this? Well, the Spirit doesn't fly backwards. So the Spirit is here leading us forward to something new, and we've got to look at it. Oscar Romero says, and this again came from Brother Mickey's, let us not hide the talents God gave us at our baptism. We have to use those talents. We live in a polarized society and church. I mean, that's an understatement. Am I a unifier or a divider? As a disciple of Christ, as a member of the people of God, am I a unifier or a divider? And how do I exhibit that? How do my words, my actions, the way I choose to live, speak to unity and community? The next slide. We are anointed in baptism and confirmation and sent to be the good news. Jesus's mission statement. I said once when I was talking to a group of people, I wish, when Stephen Covey came out with all of his stuff, and then Strength Finders came out with their stuff, and then the Enneagram, I really wish that we as a church had capitalized on this, because we have some great mission statements. And, Stephen Covey has some great material out there about how to live, how to be a leader, but our gospel's got that. And I just wish that we had thought to publish it. We could really solve a lot of the problems in the church if we had the finances to do that. But Jesus's mission statement is clearly in Luke 4. I have been sent to free the oppressed, to free the prisoner, to feed the hungry. It's in our corporal and spiritual works of mercy, and I referenced earlier Matthew 25:31-46. That's what we are anointed to do. We are anointed and sent to be the good news, living out the principles of Catholic social teaching, corporal and spiritual works of mercy, and the proclamation of his own mission statement, Jesus, and his example of being a servant leader. I was doing a focus group with a group of young people, and it was on vocation actually, but these were all young adults, and they were out of college, and a couple still in college, some of them in the work world. And we were talking about the Catholic social teaching, and one of the young women in the group said to me, I don't know what that is. After I restarted my heart, because she went to a Catholic school K through 12 and was confirmed, I thought, how could you not know what Catholic social teaching is? And I realized later that she had the principles. She probably wasn't paying attention in class when, knowing the young lady, I'm sure she wasn't paying attention in class when they delineated them and said what these were. But she shared this story. She said she was a teacher, and on her way to work every day, she discovered a pattern where there was a homeless guy that would sit on the side of the road on certain days. Not every day, but he'd be there some days. And she picked up what that pattern was. So knowing the days he was going to be there, she would make sure she had a cup of coffee and breakfast food for him. And then she would pack a lunch with a sandwich and fruit and chips and some cold drink. And on her way to work, she would pull over to the side of the road, and she would hand the food to this gentleman and say, have a great day. And he would smile and say, thank you, miss. And she would go on her way. This one day, she was coming home from teaching at the end of the school day, and he was at the spot. Obviously unexpected. She had nothing to give him. She felt terrible. So what she did was pulled over to the side of the road, parked, and got out of the car and apologized because she had nothing. And then she sat down and engaged him in a 45-minute conversation and found out about his life and a little bit of his backstory. And then she had to leave because she had to get home to care for her family. And as she got in the car, she apologized again for not having anything to give him. And he said, oh, you're wrong. You are so wrong. You gave me the greatest gift. You treated me as a person with respect. And I said to her, bada bing, that is social teaching. And she said, oh, I just thought it was being nice. I think we do a lot of things, and I think this pandemic has showed us how we have done a lot of things, and I'm hoping that it will continue afterwards, that we do look out for the dear neighbor, and we are the people of God out there. Next slide. I'm just going to touch a little bit on this. Pope Francis, of course, has said repeatedly that the shepherd has to smell like the sheep. And I heard a presentation on this encyclical last week from one of our sisters. And one of her points that she made in this is that in the past, encyclicals were written for the leaders of the church, the bishops and the priests. They're now written for the people of God. They're written for us. They're addressed to us. So when Pope Francis is saying the shepherd needs to smell like the sheep, he's talking to all of us. And he zeroes in throughout his encyclical, or a great part of his encyclical, on the Good Samaritan. And it's a long encyclical. But there are some points about the Good Samaritan story I would like to make here that I think, and then invite you to maybe take some time to go back and read it if you haven't already read this encyclical. So it's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it really is hitting upon, and his point in sharing this is that we are called to solidarity with the stranger. It's a message of inclusion. And that if we truly are the people of God, disciples of Christ, living the gospel, this is not an option. Next, Kevin. And he talks about life as a time for interactions, but with whom? Well, we're called to interact with everybody, but the issue for us is, what's our sphere of influence? Where can I interact? Where can I be the unifier and not the divider? Next. The plea of the stranger in unifying love. The Samaritan is hurt. He's lying on the side of the road. He's critically injured. And if he's saying anything, who knows? That's not in the parable, but obviously there's a plea there for help. And what happens? We know that story oh so well. The next slide, because it's about spiritual discernment. Who are we in that story? Are we the Levi and the priest that crosses the street? Not judging, don't know their backstory, but the reality is they were people that were coming from a religious tradition. So was religion just for the place, or was it supposed to be out in the world? So as we look at that story, where are we in that story? And I would suggest, at least for myself, I know sometimes I'm clearly the Good Samaritan. There are other times, not so much. I'm the Levi or the priest. I don't want to be bothered right now. I don't have time. I have an important appointment. I've got a paper that's got to be done. I've got a Zoom call I've got to get on. But as we look at that story, Francis points out clearly that Jesus doesn't focus on the robbers because he doesn't want us getting off on the bad guys, if you will. He wants us looking at our role in this. And where would we be? And then who are the Samaritans in our lives? Not the Samaritans. Who are the injured people in our lives, the wounded, in our sphere of influence that we can that we can help? You know, John the 23rd, this is another Mickey McGrath quote. We are not on earth to guard a museum, but to cultivate a flowering garden of life. The gospel that we have been given is not a museum. It is not meant to be kept in the church for us to share in our comfortable circles. It's meant for us to leave and live with all of the jabs that comes with that. All the times, and I had a teacher that once said to the class, if you read a parable and don't go, ouch, you haven't read the parable and you haven't prayed the parable. So what are we doing with this? We are the shepherds that need to smell like the sheep. So I'm going to wrap this up by going back to the question. Back to the original question. I invite you to reflect on this during Holy Week. And maybe if you want to have a discussion with the small group, but if Christ, the Son of Justice, ceased to exist, what would that mean for you? What would that mean for your neighbors in Troy, and maybe even past that? We are sent. The Mass sends us. And so I say to you, Missa, and the closing slide. Oh, before we do the closing slide, St. Francis, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this quote, says, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And that's what we're called to do. And then one of our speakers also quoted this one. I'm not sure the quote is exact, but it's the piece. Karl Barth, a great Protestant theologian, said, if you're going to do theology, then you better take a newspaper and a Bible, because you can't do it without those two pieces. So to do effective theology, one needs a Bible and a newspaper. What's your sphere of influence? Where can you make a difference? And when you leave Mass, how are you going to share the fruits of that Eucharist? We are called to be church. The place of church gives us the nurturing that we need to go out and be church, the people of God.